Finally, we're near the end. We only have a couple shots left to go over. For shot 24, I'd like you to put down foreground, middle ground, and background shot. The idea here is you can create a stronger sense of 3D or depth in your photos by making sure that you frame in something in the foreground, something in the middle ground, and something in the background, and making sure those three areas are distinct, or you have three elements in the picture that create a focus point in the foreground, middle ground, and background. For example, in this picture that I'm borrowing from the internet here, you have something that's very close to the camera, which is your foreground, and then you have kind of a middle field area, and then the background. So the way I look at this one kind of breaks down to the tree is close to the camera, that's our foreground. The middle ground is the forest floor that's full of leaves there, and the background would be the trees in the sky. Looking at this picture, the lines created by the shadows of the tree also create a sense of depth, because the lines would lead towards a vanishing point. But even if the lines or shadows were not there, having something close to the camera and having the middle ground and the background creates a sense of depth. One of my favorite photographers is Jim Brandenburg. He's from Minnesota. He has just a ton of awesome photos published in all kinds of different publications. And here's just one that kind of illustrates the idea of foreground, middle ground, and background. The tip of the canoe here is our foreground, the lake and the trees, our middle ground, and the sky is the background. It's just a nice, pleasing composition. Makes us feel like we're floating in this canoe down this, looks like a river, and just has a nice appearance because of those three elements of foreground, foreground, middle ground, and background. Try to accomplish that. You might have to reframe your shot a number of different ways to get this look, and it's real helpful to look for something that you can place fairly close to the camera to get that foreground effect. Alright, quick review of some terms that we've been talking about: focus, frame, and shoot. That's where you press halfway down on the shutter to create a focus lock. Then you move the camera slightly left or right to find your subject, and then you press your shutter down. Controlling the background, making sure that there are not distracting elements in the background that take away from attention of your subject. Ways to emphasize the focal point within the frame. We've talked about all the different elements that can be used, such as color, size, line. All those elements can be used to emphasize focal point or emphasize more attention on your subject. Key and fill light. Remember, the key light is the main light that's on a subject's face. Fill light is just a little bit of extra light to take away some of the shadow. Positive space is the space that is taken up by your subject. Negative space pretty much is the background space or everything else. Symmetry and asymmetry have to do a lot with how you place your subject in the frame. Symmetry or symmetrical placement, you place your subject in the center. Asymmetry or asymmetrical placement is where you place your subject off to the side. Rule of thirds is fine-tuning of the idea of symmetry and asymmetry, where you place the subject at one of the intersection points when you divide the frame up into thirds. Cropping to the rule of thirds, you fix a photo to make it follow the rule of thirds. And how do you create illusion of depth? Making sure there are lines in the background that gives the impression of depth, or create an ultimate vanishing point out in the distance will create that illusion of depth. And don't forget, you can also use the camera's tendency not to portray depth and perform what's called a forced perspective shot. Right, our last principle of design is unity. One shot that we can use to show unity is coming up with different types of group poses. I'm going to show you a couple ideas here on how to arrange groups of people. I really like this picture, although there's some Photoshop effects that have been placed on it. I really like the natural look of all the gentlemen in this picture. Obviously they've been posed into a line, but the photographer waited until they have had some natural looks on their faces. I think it really captures who they are. And this is just another Photoshop effect that was put on it. I've seen this pose used a lot of places, where you place one main person in the middle and two others at the shoulder, behind the shoulders, and etc. A nice easy shot to do is to place the camera above people laying on the ground like this. Creates a nice star pattern with their heads. Usually a very pleasing shot. And you can do the opposite, where the photographer sits on the ground and they point the camera up towards the group. Movement and action is always a good idea. Just we are attracted to that, and so having a group just jump up in the air at the same time. You've probably seen the shot of kids jumping off the dock into the lake. That's always a good, cool looking shot. Alright, I'm going to have you do a little bit of jury duty. I just want you to pause at each picture here and kind of ask yourself, what do you like or dislike about each image? What are the pluses? What are the minuses? Think of all the principles and rules that we've discussed. And here we go. Go ahead and pause. Please pause. All right, I'll take you through my comments here. I like this photo. A couple things that I like about it. The shirt does make the subject stand out. The background to me isn't so distracting. I kind of like to know where he is here. He's by the lake here. Something I don't like is there's so much shadow on his face, and there is a contrast here. There's very light and dark values, but this image probably would have been improved if the person using the camera had pressed the flash. Don't be afraid of using the flash outdoors, especially when there's harsh shadows. You need to throw some light back into the subject's face. So in this case, I would have added more fill light, because the main light, the key light, is the sun. Same thing with this picture. First, the things I like about it, I like how the trees form a shape to frame our subject. But again, I think using the flash to fill some light into the subject's face would have been better. The key light is the sun. The sun is very harsh when it's a sunny day, so you need to throw some light somehow back in your subject's face to fill it. I like how the trees kind of frame the subject in. Something that I don't like is maybe the center placement. Maybe crop it to the rule of thirds. What I like about the subject, this line, horizon meeting the sky meeting the land, the horizon line, tends to go here with the rule of thirds line. One thing I don't like about it really is lacking a subject. And I know this can be just a scenery shot, but the scenery maybe is not as interesting or as good as it could have been. I probably would have suggested adding a foreground element to this picture. Nice symmetrical placement of the flower. Has a nice pattern, nice texture to it. Something I don't like about it is kind of washed out. It tends to be all bright. There's very little contrast. There's a little bit of dark in the creases here of the petals, but overall it looks like they used the flash, and the flash kind of overwhelmed this picture, so it's almost all one bright value instead of having enough contrast. Here again, I think the subject obviously is in color and the background is in black and white. That does make the subject stand out. Color can be used that way, and color can be taken out of the background in Photoshop. The design of the shadows is kind of interesting. The background is a little bit distracting. Perhaps cropping it to the rule of thirds would improve it. Nice close-up photo using the macro, nice pattern. I kind of like the blurred out foreground and the blurred out area in the back here. But they could have tried repositioning the camera a little bit so there wasn't any blur, but I kind of like the look of that. Again, the flash kind of overwhelmed the subject's face. The lighting doesn't have a lot of contrast from one side to the other. It's still a pretty pleasing composition. She stands out real well from the background. Perhaps could be improved with cropping to the rule of thirds. In this case, the flash makes our subject stand out, but again his face is kind of washed out, although he has some contrast on the side. There are some background elements that are distracting. I think repositioning the subject somewhere else in this room would have been better so that there wouldn't be distractions here. And I think this is kind of a neat Photoshop effect where they took a macro shot of words in a book and then in Photoshop made this part stand out. So I think that's a pretty good composition.